Raul's excited about taxes. What have we done? We've created a monster.
We're here to talk about bread, lettuce, cheese, dead presidents, green.
It's just money, man. It's just money.
I also did find something about the history in that, it goes back, I guess societal structures existed, except taxes were in the form of like animals or goats or cows or...
Yeah. Ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt.
Which I
was taxes.
Didn't realize or understand could exist also.
Well, we know who definitely likes to do his prehistory research.
Anyone has ever heard the story of Joseph at the end of Genesis, he actually institutes a tax in order to prepare Egypt for the famine, right? There's 7 years of plenty, and then there's 7 years of famine. And what his answer is, 1/5 of all the crops in Egypt should be collected and stored in these storage things. It's a tax.
Yeah, which is the type of tax you're talking about.
Touche.
And then the crazy thing in the tax is like, so they store it up, they take the tax, and then year like 2 comes and 3, and the Egyptians are starving. And so they like, give us food because there's no food because there's no rain. They're like, okay, sell me all your cattle. I'll give you food. And it gives you food for the year. And they buy all their cattle. So the Pharaoh owns all the cattle. Then the next year they come, we don't have anything else to sell to you. We'll sell you ourselves. So all of Egypt becomes Pharaoh's slave in order for Pharaoh to then give them the grain, which he took from them by taxes. It's kind of nuts.
This is such a different version than the one I got as like a 5-year-old in like kiddie church or wherever they send you. Like,
yeah.
No.
It's in the text. It's right there. It's like, wow. Okay.
I knew the story. I didn't know it like that.
Deep thought. So do you think us dying is our tax for life?
There is an estate tax. You don't escape taxes even in death.
No comment.
Death and taxes.
That's scary.
Whoever
And then,
said that.
of course, we go forward many years, and that's how the United States got started, was over taxes, right?
The right to tax.
The right to tax, yeah, because, no taxation without representation, which is, a really catchy slogan.
Who made that up?
Good marketers.
Yeah, they didn't want to be taxed because they didn't want to be slaves. That's what they use that term a lot, actually. Slaves to the king.
We
of
own
England.
slaves. We can't be slaves. That's like slaves being slaves. That is literally their claim at that point then. Since they had
Right. You got to
slaves.
remember, too, that very small percentage of people living in the colonies actually owned slaves. Even in the South during the Civil War, there's a very small percentage. Like, it was really the upper crust, the kind of Southern aristocracy that actually owned slaves. But most of the poor people were too poor to own slaves, even, poor white people. They felt themselves to be British citizens, and British citizens have rights, and we were represented in Parliament. They had fought a civil war less than 100 years before that in England to get those rights, and then they felt they were being taken away.
Yeah, the right to get taxed.
By people we can vote out of office, kick them to the curb.
So we have our income tax system. It's a progressive tax system. As you make more, you're going to go into a higher tax bracket. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm in the 22% tax bracket. So they think all of their money is taxed at 22%. $10. Well, the first $2 might be taxed at, say, 10%. Well, my next $2, so $3 and $4 might be taxed at 20%. And my next $2 taxed at 30%. So they're all at different tax rates. That's $2, $2, $2. And so then you have your effective tax rate, which is the average of those. And then your marginal, which is what's your next dollar going to be taxed at.
And why did the marginal, why is that an important thing to know? Because
probably the most important thing about marginal is usually when you're, especially if you're trying to put money in retirement things to save taxes, so let's just say I want to put $10,000 in a retirement account. You can in 401ks. Well, the way I know how much I'm going to save in taxes is what is my marginal tax rate? So if the next $10,000 get taxed at the 20% tax rate, then I'm going to save $4,000. Sorry, $2,000. Because I'm going to get taxed 20%. So, hey, if I put this $10,000 into a retirement account, I would have only gotten $8,000. This only cost me $8,000 because I saved the 20% in taxes. And so oftentimes when you decide how much you're going to save, you're having to factor in, well, if I put this in savings, how much does it really cost you? And we haven't even touched state
I see why
taxes.
because of your saving mindset, this is a really important number because you're trying to decide because the actual value of you saving that money is not just the $8,000, it's the 20% you didn't end up
Yeah, it's
giving to the government.
how much am I costing in my head?
If the government was really good at marketing and wanting their citizens to be happy, they would just make the dollar have like a mark of like 80 cents on it or whatever it is, what the actual value is versus, you know what I mean? Like, then
This
we
is
It's
only
really confusing at the gas station. So is this 80 cents or $1? Well, it's a business expense. So currently it's $1.
see. I mean, we need
If
digital
this
money,
hasn't proved
which we
anything,
do have.
taxes are confusing.
Yes.
Right.
I actually, I mean, it was one of my
So-
biggest motivations. And ironically, actually, I probably would have been a good accountant. I loved learning about the tax system. I liked it. I found it
Right.
interesting. You can do so much if you understand how it works. Or at least it helps to be prepared as you, I mean, I just wouldn't be self-employed without it. I wouldn't have had the confidence. I would have been too scared of everything.
Right.
It
Because
removes a lot of the fear.
Maybe you can answer this or maybe not, but why do we have tax brackets where there's a different percentage when it should, like, in my head, it should just be consistent across the board?
Like a flat tax.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that make it all fair?
I'm sure there are a lot of complex answers here. I never have a problem sharing my opinion.
Well, that's what we're wanting, your opinion.
So
I've got an opinion too. But.
yeah, I would love to hear yours first, so then I can definitely hide behind it in case mine's dumb.
I mean, I think the simple, like a flat tax, I'm kind of a proponent of that, primarily because of the simplicity of it. I feel like there's so much, on one end, I feel like there's so much wasted productivity on just trying to file your taxes. There's so much. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry just filing taxes, which is not producing anything. Like there's actually no production out of it. And so if it was simpler, that creativity and energy could be used to build something much more meaningful. That's one piece. The other piece is, I mean, if we actually are concerned with, so it means what you mean, depends on what you mean by fairness, right? If it is fair because everyone's paying similar percentages of their income. And so, in that way it's good. And actually I think the simplicity of it is important too, because it's actually in all the complexity that allows what people may say the wealthy or people to actually get to use the system. The people who have the knowledge and the capacity to use the system to get ahead do. And I don't blame them for do that. I mean, I want to leverage it as much as I can, but there's part of me like, if it's simple, then it's more of an even playing field in that sense.
Right. And that's kind of what I mean by fair in terms of less room for corruption, I guess, or workarounds, or, that would make people want to be more greedy, I suppose.
Right. There's because there's so many exceptions that are created for special interests. Like there's literally an exception for like NASCAR owners in order that relate to building like stadiums. There's literally an exception for that. And there's all sorts of those sort of things.
So many. That's why it's like this big of a book.
I mean, over 400 million or over 4 million words.
Yeah, that's where,
So
what was it? Trump just said, like, he really did axe a ton of it.
Right. So it was a big reduction, which to your point, I think reduces the corruption because it allows for.
So now instead of it being this big, it's this big. Easy read now.
Yeah.
So I disagree and agree on many points. Mostly around the idea that I feel as if it would be less fair. But as far as ordinary income goes, W-2 type wages, what we have is a system that says, if you make less money, well, you have to just make a certain amount to sustain and be alive and meet minimal needs. So we're going to tax you less. You have less capacity to cost share our national parks, our school system. But if you make more money, you have more ability to cost share. And in reality, proportionate amount of our spending in tax dollars is spent on people who are paying less taxes. And if that makes sense. So our tax system, in my opinion, being a progressive tax system is good. Now, where I really agree with you is way too complex. All these exceptions, exemptions. And I would love more of a flat tax like you're talking about, but I would still make it progressive. Hey, if you don't make $20,000 a year, why tax you?
Can I tell you where I disagree with that?
I would love to.
Knowing nothing about taxes.
Probably means you'll be the most right.
Because there are communities that don't tax as much, that don't have schools that are well funded or even maybe up to standard, parks that aren't up to standard, where the taxes could definitely help build those communities. Whereas it's kind of a snowball effect right now where, you know, if you don't get taxed as much, then not enough is going to that community. And that's why we also have, you know, the big disparity between the super nice communities.
So you're talking more of some of the...
Yeah. The challenge with that, a lot of those
social
are funded
determinants
by either property tax or sales tax, because cities are usually more... KCMO is a little different because Kansas City, Missouri actually has an income tax as well, but most of that's funded through property tax.
It's actually a different tax lever because there's a lot of those. The more you have, it's like negotiating. The more you have the ability to tax in different ways, the more money that can be taxed without us realizing how much we're paying in taxes.
Your property tax just gets taken out of your mortgage every month.
Yeah. So property taxes, predominantly your hugest percentage is schools. And then you're going to get your parks. Property taxes will fund like new gyms, like the community centers.
Mm-hmm. So,
but that's not coming out of your, pretty much for the most part, not coming out of your, I guess this, I don't actually know how much, if the state gives like cities money, there's a certain amount of ignorance I have here as far as where our income tax goes. And
which, I mean, okay, that's a fair rebuttal, but then where do your wage taxes?
I don't even think we were rebutted. We just, all we did was say, well, that's not where ordinary income tax goes.
Well, my point is, where does the ordinary income tax go then?
Because that's
the real question.
We're particularly talking about federal, and then state kind of piggybacks off of that. And so,
so we're starting with federal, and where federal tax dollars go,
mostly Medicare,
and Social Security, military,
and then a bunch of little stuff that
those are
probably
your heavy hitters. Healthcare now,
which is mostly
employing
Medicaid,
a bunch of people to.
So what would happen if we were to flip where our income tax goes and where our property tax goes? Do you think there would be better living environments, better sustainability?
I mean, I'm a huge proponent of more of our tax dollars going to our local, so it filters up rather than down. So we kind of have almost like our system is almost they used to have the trickle down theory, like, oh, well, we just make really rich people and then the money trickles down. It's like, sounds great. Can I be one of the rich guys? I'll spend all my money so people can, make money. So that's kind of a weird theory to me. It always has been. Might work, might not.
One of the things like
our tax system is the same way. Let's give all of our money to the government and it filters back down.
Right.
It's really the trickle down theory to some extent. So I like the idea of your local government getting a much higher proportion than what it gets now where you live, which is really what you're saying. I totally agree. And then the state gets even more. And then the Fed, so really I'm going to start local and then state, then Fed, because we do want to all invest in the federal government. It's important. We're interested in that.
Are we?
I am.
I mean, yeah.
Protecting country, right?
You do need people to protect infrastructure. I mean, the federal government is the number one spender on infrastructure. Like our highway systems, railroad. I mean, a lot of this stuff, like without the federal government, wouldn't be maintained.
Oh, thank you for the traffic.
What?
But I have a couple of things that
wow. Didn't even like nice streets.
I mean, with all the potholes that aren't taken care of, I mean, come on now. But no, in seriousness,
choose your state line.
I know. But I want to go back to the snowball effect that I mentioned, whereas it kind of makes sense to me that the property tax destination and the income tax destination are flipped, because there's usually a snowball effect with property taxes, right? It either can go up or it can go down, but it doesn't flip-flop very often. And so,
If it does, it's always extreme too, and it
Right.
ruins neighborhoods.
right, that's my point. And so with the economy, getting better or getting worse, like you can, and minimum wages being raised, it makes sense that you would just use that tax to fund your community.
That's just not how that works.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah. No, I
You're
agree
wrong.
with you.
Okay.
That's all I wanted.
You're
That's
unwrong.
Jen agrees.
I like you.
Well, it's actually interesting, going back to the history, is that the federal government was actually ran for the first 150 years through consumption tax primarily and tariffs. So a tax on stuff coming to the U.S. from outside the borders, and particularly consumption, particularly alcohol tax. There was a federal alcohol tax. And so one of the reasons, besides we had World War I as the main reason why we got
Yep.
income tax, but the other one was prohibition, which also happened in that same period.
Right.
It's because the federal government lost a big source of income because it primarily was funded through alcohol tax.
Right. So you're saying,
So they had to
if the
figure out
government-
another way to do it.
Right. You can,
Should have never stopped selling booze.
We would all had a lot simpler April 15th.
but the whole reason it was prohibited is because people were making money without paying taxes, right?
No, that was a
Or
weird.
I'm not sure.
No, that was over like a moral.
Yeah, that was a big moral crusade.
And
Okay,
it
so
was
then-
like nobody believed. So my understanding, I think this is somebody else who told me about a Netflix documentary. So who knows what's true? But my understanding was that it actually like nobody believed it could be like prohibition could pass, and so nobody really tried to stop it.
Nobody in
and then,
the
like a
government.
small
Yeah.
group
yeah.
of people literally achieved it, and then everybody's like, "Well, now what do we do?"
And it actually started, that prohibition movement in the major way started in Kansas. There
Yeah.
was like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like group of
I know we were
ladies.
huge.
Yeah,
Well, those jerks.
yeah. Yeah, they were.
I actually didn't know that aspect about the. I mean, I just knew World War One and like world wars.
But the
in
thing is
general
that
created
actually-
a lot of tax burden.
Yeah, both of them. Yeah.
Mm.
And the thing is that it's actually unconstitutional. It was a Supreme Court case in 1894 that said, per the Constitution, which actually says the states or the federal government has the right to levy like a sales tax or consumption tax, but it cannot levy specific tax, is what I think is the term used, which means like you cannot identify for like specific people for specific reasons. And so they argued over how do you interpret this. But then the Supreme Court in 1894 said that it means that you can't have a national income tax. So they actually had to pass the 16th Amendment to the Constitution in 1914 to allow, therefore, the federal government to pass an income tax.
Really?
Yeah.
They altered the Constitution for taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, our laws are constantly being altered and
Well, the
changed
thing
and
is, with the
reinterpreted.
last time, it was the 20s, the teens or the early 20th century was crazy. There was so much additions to the Constitution. Like we haven't had a constitutional amendment. I mean,
That's
definitely in our lifetimes, let alone
right. That's why I'm
like our
baffled. Is like
parents' lifetime. We don't change
This
that
happens?
often, or-
right. Like why is this happening
they
so
added
many
a bunch of
times?
stuff.
a
that we
very fair
can't-
reaction because I was like, I wasn't sure. I was sitting there going like, have we had any other changes?
No, I mean, they added, of course, before this was so it was freeing the 13th Amendment, freeing
Yeah.
slaves, and then there was giving them the right to vote.
Yep.
Then you had,
took a little while to enforce, but
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then you had, of course, the income tax one. You had women's
women's rights.
women's ability to vote, suffrage, and there's been a couple other ones I can't off the top of my head. But then there hasn't been anything like because it takes it's not just a legislative process. They have to pass it in the Senate and the Congress, and then they have to get 2/3 of all the states' Congresses to agree to adopt it.
Mhm.
So it's not an easy process. And the big push was because they felt like the rich weren't paying their fair share. Like that's what because the original one was like anything over $3,000, which was equals to about
Oh.
$100,000 today,
Yeah, that's gonna say
was
that'd be a ton
1%.
back then.
Anything above that, and then it went up to 7%.
1%.
And then it went up to 7%. But in less than 20 years, it was up to 90. So after that, Calvin Coolidge came in the 20s and cut that 90% tax rate down to 25%. And some say that's a real big reason why we had the roaring 20s.
Can we play a quick hypothetical?
Sure.
What would happen if they left the tax at 90%? Would that just leave no wealthy bracket and just like everybody kind of equal at that point?
No, because your 100 millionaire is still going to have $10 million.
Oh, okay.
Your
That's
$100,000
true.
person only has $10,000 to spend.
And probably the thing is with the ultra wealthy, if you tax them too much, they leave.
Yeah.
Because other countries
And
are
take their
happy to
wealth
see
with
them.
them.
They fly on their
That's what
private
happened.
jet and get out of there.
That's what happened to France not too long ago because
Yeah.
they had a kind of a heavily socialist president come in, and he actually, that's what he was coming in, like a 70% wealth tax. And literally, I mean, all the wealthy people left. I mean, they could come and visit whenever they wanted to
Mhm.
on their private jets or whatever,
Just take their money with them.
take their money with them.
We know where they'll be in the future, on Mars or the moon.
That sounds
Terrible.
Mars
Sucks to be rich. But that's actually even with the U.S. That's part of the big debate with corporate tax rates and technically Trump lowering them. But we were so much higher than the other countries that companies just took their money overseas. Like, hey, you're charging 35%. The rest of the world's more like 15 to 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Apple's their headquarters are legally in Ireland.
Really?
Yeah, it has a 13% income tax rate.
Well, they had a 13%. I
Right,
think
probably.
they also got hit with the EU, I think, made them
Oh,
pay more
yeah.
taxes in
That's
the
right.
end. So,
That's right. I forgot about that.
Are they coming back here now?
I think a decent amount of
That's
money
the question.
came back in. They're building part of some of this negotiation. I'm sure that was done behind doors.
Mm-hmm.
But like they're building more stuff here. It's not like they're just coming back. But
No, I'm
Um,
talking about the legal headquarters.
yeah.
They weren't building iPhones in Ireland.
oh yeah, of course not.
The back of the iPhone needs to say "Made in California," but
Design in California.
designed in California.
But legally
But
from
legally-
Ireland. Though, as if the US did have like a 90% tax bracket, which there's a lot of countries that have really high taxes. But what that does in those countries, like I have friends from different, I won't name the countries, but particularly like the countries that are like that. It's actually how people pay their taxes. They go to the tax man and they bribe the tax man, and he writes that they actually made half as much as they did, so they pay less in taxes, and what their bribe and the taxes they actually end up paying is less than they would have paid. So
Yeah,
it
and you're
creates this
talking
huge
about
black market.
countries, where it's very high tax rates.
So that's where like taxes done improperly really promote corruption.
Mm-hmm.
So high taxes or complex taxes or
It's hard to enforce it. Like when you're trying to collect so much that people, I mean, the more you try to collect, the harder it is going to be to enforce because the more people will fight it.
yeah, it's the cost, right? The people are making rational decisions. Like if you have a low tax amount, it's the risk is not worth the reward.
Yeah.
But the higher the taxes get, it's the more the reward is to be worth taking the risk.
I wouldn't even care if the IRS did hear me say it. I've totally made those decisions. All right. Oh, I miscalculated this. I should have paid $1 more maybe in taxes. Maybe it was $10 is like a high one I found once. And it's like, well, this is going to take like 10 hours and maybe even pay an accountant to help me refile some forms that might cost me $150 to go give $1 to somebody. It's like, I'm just going to go drop $1 in a charity jar somewhere. Like, thank you for listening or watching It's Just Money. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please subscribe so you don't miss out.
Also, leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please comment below.
But remember, it's just money.